So obviously, given what's happened, I know you've been sent home from school today, so you are under arrest at the moment.
The issue of teachers sexually abusing their young, vulnerable students is not just a problem here in the United States. No, schools all over the world deal with it, and in a recent case from the UK, it's making global headlines. We're taking a closer look at the case of Rebecca Joins with former sex crimes prosecutor Serena Townsend. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. A British teacher, now 30 years old, cried in a Manchester courtroom as she was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for sexually abusing two teenage boys and becoming pregnant by one of them. As if all the stories that we've been covering here in the United States about educators abusing or allegedly abusing their own students wasn't so bad. Now we're going abroad. So in 2021, Rebecca Joins was caught on security footage inside of a high-end store buying a Gucci belt for a 15-year-old boy. The high school math teacher allegedly bought the $450 belt as a way to groom the boy for what would come next. And what I mean by that is she drove the teen to her flat, where the two were seen on camera walking into the complex. According to prosecutors, they then had sex twice. The teen messaged a friend over Snapchat to tell him that he'd just had sex with Miss Joins. When the friend didn't believe him, he apparently secretly took a photo of her and sent it. Now that was on a Friday. By Monday, word about the encounter, as you can imagine, had spread. The boy's mother had found a hickey on his neck, prompting her to head to the school in a rage. Joins was sent home and Greater Manchester police showed up at her door.
So obviously, given what's happened, I know you've been sent home from school today, so you are under arrest at the moment on suspicion of sexual activity with a child. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention one question, something which you later rely in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence.
How's it gone so far since?
So the necessity for the arrest is obviously to protect the vulnerable and for prompt and effective investigation. So obviously you are under caution. You will be given obviously your chance to say everything at the station. But obviously for the time being you're under arrest. So
she was released on bail, but ordered not to have contact with any children under 18. She was also suspended from her job. But unbelievably, not only did she not follow any of those parameters, she apparently pursued a relationship, a sexual relationship, with a second teenage boy who had been a student at her school. And guess what happened this time? She became pregnant. Yes. While Joins' relationship with this second victim, known in court documents as Boy B, was not illegal by the time she got pregnant, their relationship started when he was 15. And according to testimony, Joins revealed the pregnancy to Boy B with a series of surprises, which culminated in her handing him a baby onesie with the words, "Best Dad," on it. That's how she told him. Now, Joins had testified during her trial that she only became sexually attracted to Boy B after he reached legal age. She was arrested for the second time after that date night, if you even want to call it, where she announced her pregnancy. She was found guilty in May of 2024 and sentenced last week to 6.5 years behind bars. She cried, shook in Manchester Crown Court as Judge Kate Cornell handed down the punishment. Judge Cornell said in court, "There is a breathtaking arrogance in your conduct. You were the adult. You were the person in control, the person who should have known better and entrusted by the school and the boys and by their parents of caring for their sons. Instead, you abused that position of trust and exploited the privileged role for your own sexual gratification." Judge Cornell also made the point that 15-year-old boys are no less vulnerable than girls. Equally, a female teacher is capable of behaving as manipulatively as a male teacher. Well, Boy A did not submit a victim impact statement. Boy B did, and I will tell you right now, it is heartbreaking. He said, "I was coerced, controlled, manipulated, sexually abused, and mentally abused. It is very upsetting that this has happened to me. The months after the abuse happened to me was a very dark time. I felt backed into a corner. I just lived a double life for 18 months behind my family's back." He goes on to state, "One of the hardest things I had to deal with in this time was not being able to be involved in the pregnancy. Social services contacted me in October and told me that Rebecca had refused to let them update me about anything, including due date, gender, health updates. The The thought of not being able to see my child was heartbreaking. And it was revealed during trial that the child was taken from Joins within 24 hours of being born. The statement from this boy B goes on to state, I now also really struggle with the idea of going into another relationship due to the negative experience I've gone through with Rebecca. Ultimately, I will forever be Rebecca's victim and forever linked to her through our child. All right, we're going to get back to this story and really what a story it is. But back to the United States, let me take a minute to thank our incredible sponsor here on Sidebar, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. If you should find yourself in a position where you're hurt and you need legal representation, Morgan & Morgan may be who you want in your corner, as they are specialists in this area. And you know why they're so big? Because they win a lot, multi-million-dollar verdicts and settlements. They make the process so easy for their clients, because from starting your claim to uploading documents to signing contracts to talking to your legal team, it can all be done from your smartphone. That's it. And also, this is a firm where there's no upfront fee. No, you only pay them if you win. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. I want to bring in Serena Townsend, former sex crimes prosecutor, who unfortunately is now becoming a regular because we're seeing, not that I don't want you on the program, but we're talking so much about this. Aside from the fact that this is abroad, how does this one rank up in the cases you've seen?
Oh, it's so terrible. It's horrible. And the real life repercussions that are long term is especially poignant here because of the fact that there's a child involved, meaning the newborn baby that is the product of this horrible situation. And so it's bad enough for a child to be sexually abused by somebody who is in a position of trust, like his teacher. Bad enough that there are multiple victims in this case, boy A and boy B. But now, like boy B said, he is inextricably linked to his abuser because of the fact that she got pregnant with his child and apparently only told him about it until, after the fact.
You've seen cases like that before, right? Where someone gets, the female perpetrator becomes pregnant?
Absolutely. I've prosecuted cases like that before. And I will tell you that the impact it has on the victim, the boy, and the boy's family is immeasurable. And it doesn't ever go away.
What happens to the child?
The baby. So there are a lot of procedures that have to be in place, and there's determinations that need to be made with respect to what's in the best interest of that child. Is it in that child's interest to be with the mother, who is an abuser?
But if she's locked away, how is that a possibility?
Right, and you have to figure that out, because sometimes the person is released while that child is still underage, right? So if this woman is getting released after 6 years, then that child is still going to be underage at that time. Is there any sort of relationship that can be had both during and after incarceration?
Can we break that down for 1 second?
Sure.
Are you saying, a couple things there, are you saying that if a woman is convicted of abusing a boy and she becomes pregnant, the sentence could be delayed until the child is of age, or that there could be a circumstance where she can get out 3 years, 6 years, and the child would go back to her? I mean, are any of those two, maybe I'm not understanding correctly.
So I don't think a sentence would be delayed,
okay.
But once she's released, she could always petition, right?
Okay.
Right, to see the child, to have some sort of visitation rights or any rights whatsoever. Now, in this kind of situation, one would hope that a judge would not allow that, right? She's going to have to register as a sex offender, which is going to prevent her from having any sort of contact with certain people of certain ages, living in certain places. So I am very sure that a judge would take very seriously the impact that this child would, face if reunited with the mother.
What about going to the father, and especially if it's an underage boy? Does the court say, the government say, he's not in a position to be able to take care of a child at this point? So if you have an underage father, is there ever a circumstance where the child goes to him and his family?
It can happen if obviously the parents of the underage boy are willing to take that responsibility. These are all very intricate legal questions that have to get ironed out in front of a judge. And ultimately, the bottom line, the decision is what is in the best interest of that baby.
There's something about Boy B's statement, other than the fact about how heartbreaking it was. The fact about talking, and one of the things he mentioned was that he felt he didn't get the same kind of help and resources as if you had a young girl who was abused by a man. And I thought that statement, coupled with the statement from the judge talking about, we need to understand what this is. And we've talked about that so many times. There's like a stigma, right? That if there's a female perpetrator and there's a male victim, we look on it differently if it was the other way around, right?
Oh yeah, there's been a stigma for a very long time in these kinds of cases, and it's thankfully in more recent years, hopefully this stigma is changing and people are changing and society is changing and recognizing that women are just as powerful and manipulative and abusive potentially as a man, and that the male victims, the male child, teenager, is still just as vulnerable as a female victim as well. And for a long time, people have not, been in that headspace. They haven't really thought of it that way. And I like the fact that the judge specifically called that out, because we have to use our judicial system, including judges, to send those messages, not only to the defendants, the female defendants, but to society at large. Society has to be educated that our male teenagers and male children are just as vulnerable and suffer the same consequences as girls and teenage females.
You know what else Boy B said in his statement that stayed with me is that he has this feeling of a sense of guilt because he provided essentially evidence, he provided testimony, statements against Rebecca Joins, who was, he said, the mother of his child, and was kind of split there about whether he was doing the right thing or not. I'm sure, have you seen that happen before?
Sure, and that just goes to show you how the trauma evolves in this poor child, in this teenager.
Yeah.
Because it's bad enough for him to have experienced what he had experienced. Now he's got to feel the guilt that he's ratting on the mother of his child. It is, you can't even comprehend the kind of psychological torture that he's facing when having to make those decisions. And I think he also mentioned in his statement he had been in love with her, or at least he had thought he was in love with her. That all goes back to her power of manipulation and using him for her own gratification. And now he's left to suffer, both now and in the entire future of his and his child's life.
We talk about what she did in the sense that she told Boy B that she couldn't get pregnant.
Oh.
I mean, that idea, I can't get pregnant. And then the way she tells him that she's pregnant, what'd you make of that?
Psychological warfare. I mean, it's a nightmare for that poor boy. I mean, that's part of her manipulation into getting him to have sex with her. Because in his mind, maybe he felt safer, maybe that he felt like it wouldn't be found out because she couldn't get pregnant. And so, he felt safe with her on so many levels, both as kind of a mother figure, but also a mother of his eventual child figure at this point, so much so that he felt the need to protect her from having judicial consequences, criminal consequences.
Having to keep it a secret. He talked about that.
That's right.
So not only it's the trauma of this event with her, these series of events, but also the stress of having to keep it a secret from his family and friends.
Right. And just think, like you just said, how she disclosed to him the fact that she was pregnant. Even that action was so manipulative, right? She didn't have, a sit down with him and say,
No.
look, we have to talk about something really terrible or really serious. I want your input on what I do or what we decide to do with this unborn child. No, she made it almost like this party, which is so, again, manipulative of this little boy, of this teenage boy. It's like, I've already made my decision, and I'm just letting you know that this is happening in this surprise situation where he probably felt like he couldn't act any other way but supportive and surprised and happy about this.
We talk about repeat offenders all the time, but isn't it particularly brazen that while she, was accused of having sex with one boy, while there's conditions putting on her release, she does this? I mean, that, we know about repeat offenders, we know about people who engage in this cycle, but that is like next level.
It is, and the judge said it best, breathtaking arrogance.
Yeah.
That's what it was. It's insane behavior. If anything, you should be acting on your best behavior while you're out on bail, while you're fighting a really serious, embarrassing charge of sexual misconduct with a child, and now you're continuing that same behavior while the case is pending. I mean, it's really inconceivable to understand why she would do that.
And we always get to the why. Why would someone do this? Are they mentally ill? Do they have a sickness? Clearly you have to imagine there's always something like that involved. But what I found really interesting here is she had gotten out of a 9-year relationship. And the reporting is that she kind of felt flattered that teenage boys were giving her attention. Mm-hmm. Is that something you've seen?
I have, as a former sex crimes prosecutor and also as a defense attorney, the reasons why people do the things that we cannot comprehend,
right.
We try to figure it out, and we try to kind of look at her behavior before, during, and after to see what's going on. And it's still hard to appreciate, still hard to understand. But yes, you do see this level of arrogance and this level of wanting to be desired. And she, like you said, was just fresh off of a bad breakup. And I guess she felt, desired by these people who she was enamored by herself, which is not understandable to the normal mindset. It's not.
And by the way, you're a U.S. attorney. You're not a U.K. attorney. You don't practice in other jurisdictions. But what I find really interesting about this, and one of the reasons we wanted to cover it, is we've been covering so much about what's happening in this country. But this does happen around the world, right?
Absolutely. People are people, no matter where you are. They do terrible things, and they do unexplainable things, and they do unspeakable horrors to children. And that's not because they're American or from the UK. That's because they're people. They're people who are driven by arrogance. They're driven by the need to be wanted and desired, and the thought that they'll never get caught.
But is the perception different? I talked about it before. There's these stigmas. Do you feel like our country is the best at understanding sexual abuse right now and understanding the complexities surrounding it, understanding, there are victims who are both male and female. I think it was a previous sidebar we were talking about the Jeffrey Epstein case.
Sure.
And there was a question of how those girls who came forward against him back in Florida in 2005, the way that they were questioned by the grand jury members and they were questioned by prosecutors in the 2006, it almost felt like shaming them. It almost felt like judging them. And I spoke with the current Palm Beach County State Attorney, Dave Arenberg, and he goes, look, our perception today of what sexual assault means was very different back then, and particularly in that space. But, it made me think that in our country, in our culture, I think we're quite advanced in understanding it. In your experience, do you see that in other countries? Are some maybe more, in line with that, or are there some that really haven't taken that step and haven't gotten to the same place that we are?
I mean, I just look at what we're doing in our country, and it looks like we are trying.
Right.
That's what it feels like to me. And I was a sex crimes prosecutor back when Jeffrey Epstein was being investigated. And I will say, things have evolved, in my opinion, to the better. For example, we had the reopening of, with this Adult Survivors Act, you had the reopening of the lawsuit window for people who did not sue back in the day to be able to sue now, even though it's past the typical statute of limitations. Yeah. And I think, it's laws like that, it's rules like that are showing that our country is willing to implement rules to try to help, sex abuse victims and survivors. So I think that that's a positive thing. I think statements like this judge made with respect to women versus men and how it's the same type of thing and we can't look at it differently are ways that our country is advancing. And I hope that to the extent that other countries look at us as leaders in that space, that they do, kind of mimic what we're trying to do here.
And look, I think there's something to also talk about these stories and amplify them a little bit. Parents might be seeing some of the warning signs we describe right here. Maybe schools can do a little bit more in background checks about who they're, engaging to work for them. And I think that, pushing under the radar, not talking about is not the right move, because I think you need to have that conversation and you need for people to understand what is happening, unfortunately, both in this country and abroad. So Serena Townsend, as always, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you again. But again, every time I see you, it's
bad news bears.
It really is. It's one of these cases. Thank you so much, though.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.